The clock had just struck midnight, when the laughter turned sharp enough to cut. Champagne flutes chimed like a taunt, and the crystal chandelier above us scattered cold light across polished smiles. I stood near the marbled mantelpiece, hands folded so tightly my knuckles had gone white, while cousins in sequins drifted past me carrying gilded gift bags tied with satin bows. One by one, the bags were handed out, names announced with glittering cheer until the room became a flurry of torn tissue, perfume clouds, and the rustle of crisp currency envelopes. My name never left anyone's lips. "Maybe next year," my aunt said, the pearls at her throat quivering with an almost sympathetic chuckle. On the piano, a jazzy rendition of Auld Lang Syne snagged on a wrong note, but no one noticed. I felt the heat rise behind my eyes, that same old ember of humiliation I'd learned to swallow since childhood. My brother's wife, radiant in silver, leaned toward me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Don't take it personally," she murmured, tapping my empty hands. "Traditions can be selective." Selective? Right? I could hear the terrace doors hissing as they opened to the winter air, the buzz of distant fireworks, the ice cracking softly in Uncle Than's tumbler. Paper snowflakes too perfect hung from invisible thread, spinning lazily above a dessert table that sagged with excess. Every glossy surface reflected a family that performed love convincingly, while I stood uncast, a shadow outside the frame. Then, under the music and the laughter, I heard the gentle zip of leather as I pulled my satchel open. The envelope inside wasn't festive. No ribbon, no gold seal. Just a lawyer's letterhead embossed in sober indigo, and my name typed without flourish. My fingers trembled. When I slid the papers free, the room dimmed at the edges, like a camera narrowing its focus. I cleared my throat, and for the first time that night, the piano went quiet. "Since I didn't get a gift," I said, my voice steadying, "maybe I should give one to the family." I held up the documents. The chandelier's light found the watermark, and something in my mother's face faltered. I was not born into this family as an equal. That truth revealed itself early, though at first it was only a shadow that flickered at the edge of my childhood. When I think back to my earliest memories, they always smell faintly of jasmine and floor polish. Our house was too large for a child to ever feel completely safe in it. Long corridors where my footsteps echoed back at me, echoing emptiness. The walls were decorated with oil portraits of ancestors, whose stern gazes seemed to measure every breath I took. And though the home glittered with marble floors and velvet curtains, there was a coldness under it all, a chill that clung to the edges of laughter, especially when it was directed at me. My parents had 2 children, my older brother, Min, and me. From the moment he was born, the family rejoiced as though an emperor had arrived. When I came along, their joy was more subdued, polite even, like the applause after a forgettable performance. As a little girl, I didn't understand why the toys under the Christmas tree were always stacked higher for Min, why relatives kissed his cheek twice, and mine only once, or why he was allowed to spill juice on the carpet without consequence while I was scolded for dropping crumbs. But I felt it. Children always feel it. There is one memory I cannot shake. I must have been 7 years old. It was Lunar New Year's Eve, and the family gathered around the dining table that groaned with roasted duck, sticky rice cakes, and sweet lotus seeds. After dinner, the tradition was to hand out red envelope symbols of luck and prosperity. One by one, each child's name was called. My cousins' eyes sparkled as they received envelopes fat with bills, their parents smiling proudly behind them. Min's envelope was so thick it barely closed, and everyone applauded as though he had achieved something great merely by existing. When my turn came, my grandmother looked at me, sighed, and handed me a thin envelope. Inside, instead of money, was a single folded note with a proverb, "Endure, and you will find peace." Everyone chuckled kindly, as though it was some joke I should understand. But I was just a child. I held that envelope in my lap, my cheeks burning, my heart quietly cracking. That was the night I learned endurance was expected of me. Love was conditional. Value had to be proven. Growing older did not soften the edges. If anything, the favoritism calcified into something harder. Min was given opportunities one was denied, tutors for piano and foreign languages, a car for his 18th birthday, the promise of a job in the family's import business after graduation. I was told to make do with less because you're more independent. My independence was not a gift, it was a sentence. Family photos tell the story better than I ever could. There's one where we are standing in front of the ancestral altar. Min in the center, his arm around father, both of them smiling, their bodies angled proudly toward the camera. I'm off to the side, half hidden behind an aunt's shoulder, my smile a strained curve. Looking at it now, I see the choreography, who was meant to be visible, and who was meant to be background. I tried, 4 years, to earn my place. I studied hard, earned scholarships, worked part-time jobs that my family dismissed as unnecessary struggles. At dinner parties, when relatives asked what I was doing, I'd proudly say I was in university. My father would wave a hand and reply, yes, but it's nothing compared to Min's achievements. Every sentence became a dismissal, each word erasing me further. And yet, despite the neglect, I still longed for their approval. That's the cruelest thing about being overlooked by your own family. You keep hoping that if you try hard enough, one day they'll finally see you. When my grandmother passed away, I remember standing by her coffin, the incense smoke curling upward like unanswered prayers. Relatives whispered about inheritance, about how the family house in the old quarter would be divided. Min's name was on every lip. No one even glanced at me. As though my blood wasn't the same, as though grief wasn't flowing in my veins too. That night, in the quiet of my room, I cried into my pillow. Not for the inheritance I had long accepted I would never be considered for such things, but because even in death, favoritism remained unchallenged. My grandmother's last words to me, written years earlier in that New Year's envelope, rang bitterly in my ears, endure, and you will find peace. Peace never came. Only silence. It was around then that I began noticing the cracks in the illusion of unity my family worked so hard to maintain. At gatherings, I would watch the way uncles passed money under the table, the way my mother's smile stiffened when certain topics arose, the way my father's laughter grew too loud when questions pressed too close. I began to see the family for what it was, not a sanctuary, but a stage. And I was the unwanted understudy. By the time I was in my 20s, I had learned to stop expecting gifts at New Year's. The envelope still came, thin and perfunctory, a gesture done out of habit rather than affection. Min's, meanwhile, grew thicker each year, a visible measure of his worth. Sometimes I would pretend not to notice, telling myself that money didn't matter, that I could build a life on my own. But deep down, it wasn't about the money. It was about what the money represented: recognition, belonging, love. Even so, I endured. Until the night I couldn't anymore. That night, the one I began telling you about, when the champagne sparkled and my hands trembled around the lawyer's envelope, was not born in a vacuum. It was the result of decades of quiet erasure, of wounds laid upon wounds, of a lifetime spent in the shadows of people who claimed to love me. And the irony. The secret papers in my hand that evening didn't just hold legal text. They held a truth my family had tried to bury. A truth that began years before, in whispered conversations behind closed doors, in signatures inked under dim lamps, in decisions made without mebut about me. When I realized what those papers contained, I knew everything was about to change. It began, as it always does, with small things so subtle you could almost dismiss them as coincidence. But when patterns repeat for years, you stop believing in coincidence. You start recognizing design. The weeks before that New Year's gathering were thick with tension. I had returned home, after years of living in a modest apartment on my own. My mother insisted I come, though her tone carried more obligation than warmth. "It's tradition," she said on the phone, as if that word alone should be enough to mend the fractures running through our bloodline. I arrived at the house 3 days before the celebration. The gates were strung with fairy lights, blinking cold blue against the winter sky. Inside, the staff bustled with trays of sugared fruit, baskets of imported wine, and boxes of delicacies flown in from overseas. The smell of roasted chestnuts and cinnamon wafted through the hall, but beneath it lingered another sense, harper, metallic, like old resentments resurfacing. The first evening back, Min greeted me at the door. He had grown heavier, but his presence filled the space more than ever. He wore a tailored suit just to lounge around the house, as though every hallway were a boardroom. He kissed me on the cheek, his cologne overpowering, then glanced at my worn coat and chuckled. "Still dressing like a university girl, huh? You should let me take you shopping one day." It was not an offer. It was a reminder of hierarchy. I smiled tightly, slipping past him into the living room where our parents sat surrounded by relatives. The television blared a holiday special, but no one paid attention. They were too busy praising Min for a new business contract, a property he had just bought, a car he was importing. Each word painted him as the heir apparent, the golden child. My arrival barely rippled the air. A few cousins nodded politely. An uncle muttered, "You're back." My chair was tucked slightly farther from the circle, as though the geometry of the room itself wanted me out of view. In the days leading up to the party, I noticed the way preparations revolved entirely around Min. He chose the menu, the decor, even the playlist for the evening. At one point, when I suggested adding a traditional dessert our grandmother used to love, my mother waved a hand dismissively. "That's old-fashioned. Min has arranged something more sophisticated." Her voice carried pride, the kind she never reserved for me. The injustice was not just in words but in gestures. When Min entered a room, conversations paused so he could dominate them. When I spoke, people checked their phones or sipped their tea. I told myself not to care, to detach, but each dismissal cut deeper than I admitted. They were rehearsals for the humiliation waiting on New Year's night. The spark itself came quietly. 2 nights before the celebration, I overheard my parents and Min speaking in hushed tones in father's study. I had gone upstairs to fetch a book I left behind years earlier, when voices slipped under the heavy oak door. At first, I caught only fragments: "Transfer, documents, she doesn't need to know." My chest tightened as I pressed closer, heart hammering in my ears. Then Min's voice, "It's better this way. She's not really invested in the family. She won't understand business matters." Mother's reply, low and sharp, "She'll ask questions. She always does." Father sighed. "We'll keep it simple. At the party, we'll make the announcement. Min will handle everything moving forward." I froze. An announcement? Handle everything. The words rattled like loose stones in a jar. Before I could lean in further, footsteps approached. I scrambled back into the corridor just as the door opened. Min stepped out, eyes catching mine. For a second, his expression tightened, an almost imperceptible flicker of suspicion before he plastered on his usual grin. "Can't sleep. Don't worry. Big things are coming." Big things. For him, never for me. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling while fireworks crackled faintly in the distance. My mind replayed every injustice I'd endured, layering them over this new insult. Something was being hidden. Something that involved me. I remembered the lawyer's envelope in my bag, a document delivered weeks earlier, under circumstances I hadn't yet fully grasped. At the time, I thought it was just legal jargon, an afterthought in the wake of family affairs. But suddenly, it pulsed with possibility. Maybe those papers contained the answers I had been denied all my life. The next day, small humiliations multiplied. During lunch, Min mocked the job I held in the city, calling it small potatoes. Relatives laughed. My aunt asked if I planned to finally settle down, her tone dripping with implication that independence was failure. When I helped the staff arrange flowers, my mother scolded me for not placing them with enough elegance, while she praised Min for merely nodding approvingly at the arrangements. The hypocrisy suffocated me. Every word, every glance, every slight was tinder. The study conversation had been the match. And New Year's Eve was the stage where it would all ignite. On the afternoon of the party, the house transformed. Chandeliers blazed, tables groaned under mountains of food, the air filled with chatter and the clink of champagne glasses. Relatives arrived in waves, carrying boxes wrapped in gold foil, their laughter swelling like an orchestra tuning before the performance. Fireworks crackled in rehearsal outside, the city alive with anticipation. I stood by the window, watching the blur of lights and feeling like an outsider at my own family's celebration. My reflection stared back at me in the glass. A woman draped in a simple black dress, unadorned, understated, a stark contrast to the sequined whirl around me. My heart thudded with dread and determination. Tonight would not be another endurance. Tonight, I carried something they could not ignore. And then came the moment. Midnight. The countdown echoed through the hall, 10, 9, 8, glasses raised, voices boomed. Balloons shivered overhead, ready to fall. I stood at the edge of the crowd, the lawyer's envelope pressing against my side like a heartbeat. When Happy New Year erupted, confetti rained down, music blasted, and relatives exchanged embraces. The gifts began circulating, names called with ceremony. The same ritual I had endured since childhood, except this time, my name was never spoken. Not once. I watched as cousins unwrapped watches, jewelry, and envelopes thick with cash. Min received a set of keys tied with a golden ribbon. Applause thundered as father announced it was for a new vacation property. Champagne spilled in celebration, laughter swelling. And me? My hands remained empty. Again. Someone chuckled. Someone else whispered, she should be used to it by now. The cruelty was casual, unthinking, as though my erasure was part of tradition itself. That was when the ember inside me caught fire. My humiliation, my anger, my decades of silence condensed into a single decision. I reached into my bag. My fingers closed around the envelope. The air thickened as I pulled it free, the hush of leather unzipping barely audible beneath the revelry. I felt eyes flick toward me, curious. I cleared my throat, and though the music still played, my voice cut through. Since I didn't get a gift, I said, perhaps it's time I give one to the family. The laughter faltered. The piano player's hands froze on the keys. Every gaze turned toward me as I held the papers high, the lawyer's seal gleaming under chandelier light. And for the first time in years, I saw something on their faces that had never been there before: fear. The room stilled in a way I had never experienced before. My family, usually so quick to fill silence with laughter or idle chatter, froze like a painting every brushstroke locked mid-motion. Even the chandelier above seemed to buzz quieter, as though electricity itself leaned in to listen. I stood in the center, the lawyer's envelope raised in my hand, the documents trembling ever so slightly. My breath came slow, steady, each inhale pushing against the tightness in my chest. Father was the first to break the silence. "What are you doing?" His voice was calm, but there was a brittle edge beneath it, like porcelain threatening to crack. "I'm giving a gift," I replied, forcing the words past my dry lips. "A gift of truth." The circle tightens. Relatives shifted uneasily in their seats. My cousins, still clutching their gilded gift bags, glanced between me and my parents, unsure whether to smirk or shrink. Min leaned back in his chair, crossing one leg over the other with practiced arrogance. "Oh, come on," he said smoothly, swirling champagne in his glass. "Don't make this dramatic. You didn't get a present, and now you're trying to steal the spotlight." His smirk widened, exposing his teeth. "It's embarrassing, really. Embarrassing." The word burned in my ears. How many times had they used that word about me? For speaking too loudly, for wearing the wrong dress, for asking too many questions. I unfolded the papers slowly, deliberately, the crisp sound slicing through the stale air. This isn't about a present. This is about what's been hidden. About what you all pretended I didn't need to know. The first ripples. My aunt's pearls clicked nervously as she leaned forward. "What are you talking about, dear?" she asked, voice honeyed but eyes sharp. I met her gaze. "I'm talking about the will. Grandmother's will." Gasps rippled across the room. Chairs creaked as people shifted. The word will hung in the air heavier than any champagne toast. Mother stood abruptly, her face pale. "That's not something to bring up tonight. This is a celebration." Celebration. I laughed, though it came out more like a tremor. For who? For Min, who gets everything handed to him. For all of you, who pretend fairness while carving me out of the picture. Father's jaw tightened. "Sit down." "No," I said firmly, my voice ringing louder than I expected. My heart raced, but I stood straighter, taller. I've been sitting down my entire life. Tonight, I'm standing. The reveal. I held the papers higher, the lawyer's seal catching the chandelier's glare. This isn't a rumor. This is legal. Grandmother didn't leave everything to Min. She didn't forget me, like you all did. Min's glass clinked sharply against the table as he set it down. His smirk faded. "You don't know what you're talking about." I read aloud, my voice trembling but clear. "To my granddaughter, I leave the property on Tranhungdao Street, along with all its holdings and associated accounts." The words dropped like stones in water, sending shockwaves across the polished floor. "That's a mistake," my uncle barked, his face flushing crimson. "That house has always been intended for Min." "Intended," I repeated, the bitterness curling my tongue. "But not written. Not signed. Not sealed. Grandmother chose differently." The storm erupts. Voices burst all at once, overlapping in a chaotic crescendo. "She must have forged it. No one told us. Show me those papers. This isn't how our family works." The room devolved into noise, but I stayed rooted, the papers clutched against my chest. Mother's voice rose above the chaos. "Enough." She turned to me, her eyes blazing. "Where did you even get that? Who gave it to you?" "The lawyer," I replied. "The one you conveniently forgot to mention. He sent me the official copy weeks ago." I didn't understand why until now. Min shoved his chair back, the legs screeching against marble. "You think you can just waltz in here, after years of absence, and claim something that isn't yours?" His face twisted with rage. "That house is part of the business. Do you even know how to manage property? Do you know the first thing about responsibility? Do you?" I shot back. "Or do you just know how to take whatever father hands you?" Masks slip. For the first time in years, I saw fear in Min's eyes. Not just anger, fear. He lunged forward, trying to snatch the papers from my hand. I stepped back, clutching them tighter. "Stop." My voice cracked like a whip. "Stop pretending I don't exist. Stop erasing me from everything. This paper proves what I've always known, that I mattered to grandmother. That I was not invisible to her. My words hung in the air, raw and undeniable. My cousin Lynn, usually silent, spoke up timidly. If it's legal, then maybe she's right. Father's head snapped toward her, his glare silencing her instantly. This is not a discussion for children. I laughed bitterly. Children. I am 32 years old, Father. When will you stop treating me like an afterthought? The breaking point. The arguments twisted louder, sharper. Uncles shouted about tradition, aunts clutched their pearls, cousins whispered. The chandelier above rattled faintly, as if shaken by the tension. Then Min slammed his fist against the table. Plates rattled, champagne spilled. You don't deserve it, he roared. That house was meant for me. You've never sacrificed for this family. You've never carried the weight of expectations. I stared at him, incredulous. Expectations? You mean the golden road paved for you since birth? The applause for simply breathing. While I scraped for scholarships, for jobs, for scraps of attention. Don't talk to me about sacrifice. I've sacrificed my entire life, just to stay in this family's shadow. Mother clutched her temples, muttering, "This isn't happening." But it was. The performance was over. The truth was on stage now, and it wasn't leaving. The collapse. At that moment, I realized the documents in my hands were more than paper. They were a mirror. Every face in that room reflected panic, denial, greed, shame. Their perfect facade cracked, and for once, I wasn't the weak one. You all laughed at me tonight, I said quietly, my voice cutting through the noise. Because I had no gift. But I see it now, I've been carrying the heaviest gift of all. Truth. And truth doesn't need a bow. The room fell into a heavy silence. Even the chandelier seemed to dim, as though the light itself recoiled from the wreckage. The conflict was far from over. If anything, it had only just begun. Because when you expose the secrets of a family built on appearances, the walls don't just shake. They crumble. And in that crumbling, I finally found my voice. I didn't sit down. I didn't fold. For once, I refused to become the quiet space between everyone else's sentences. Listen, I said, and the single word landed with a thud. I laid the papers gently on the polished table, as if placing a knife flat so everyone could see its edge. There's more than the will. There are letters. Dates. A notarized affidavit. And a record of a meeting you all pretended never happened. Min scoffed, but it came out thin. This is pathetic. Read, I said, sliding the top page toward him. My hands had stopped shaking. Go on. He didn't reach for it. Father did. His fingers, usually steady even after 3 whiskeys, hesitated at the lawyer's seal, then pinched the document with forced calm. He skimmed the first page, then the second, and I watched his face go through the stages of a storm, clouding, tightening, then flashing with a lightning-bright panic. He glanced at Mother, whose lips parted. She didn't breathe. What does it say? An uncle whispered. I answered, because I wanted the words to come from my mouth. Grandmother met with her attorney 2 weeks before she died. She updated her will. She left the Tran Hung Dao property to me. And she established a contingency trust to cover the maintenance, taxes, and all future repairs, so I wouldn't be shamed into returning it for financial reasons. Those were her exact words. A tremor ran through the room. Champagne fizz hissed soft as rain. And, I continued, sliding out the next document, there's a letter from grandmother, handwritten, notarized the same day. She explains why. She writes about the night I received a proverb instead of an envelope. She writes about listening through the door while I cried. She writes that she watched me be erased. I paused, swallowing. The words in that letter had knocked the breath out of me the first time I read them. Now, they steadied me. Min gave a brittle laugh. Touching. But that house was never part of any operating agreement, I cut in. I brought the property registry extract too. The house is outside the import company's assets. It was always a personal holding. Grandmother's personal holding. Enough, father snapped, the word breaking from him like something he'd been holding in his teeth. He turned on me, pupils pinpoints. You don't understand the complexity here. There were conversations. Agreements. Your grandmother was confused near the end. Then why, I asked softly, did she pass the cognitive screening appended to this affidavit? I tapped the third page. Her lawyer had her evaluated by a physician that morning. You taught me to read footnotes, father. Don't pretend you can't see the one right there. My aunt's pearl necklace clicked as she shifted, her fingers pinching the string, as if it were a rosary. Even if this is true, she said, voice shaking, it is unkind to spring it on the family like this. You could have discussed it privately. We don't do privately in this family, I said. We do under the rug. And the rug is full. A cousin snickered, then covered it with a cough. The sound made father's head snap. Control, for him, had always depended on the room's compliance. The room wasn't complying. Min surged to his feet. You don't get to waltz in here with photocopies and rewrite our history. They are originals, I said. The copies went to the attorney of record. And there's one more thing. I pulled out the final sheet, the one I had tucked beneath the others because it was the sharpest. A memo from the same lawyer, summarizing a meeting with you and father, held 3 days after grandmother's update. You requested a reconsideration. His notes state that he declined to make unauthorized amendments. He also notes that you suggested losing the update because she won't fight it. He wrote those words in quotation marks. Min's skin went blotchy. That's a lie. The memo includes the receptionist's log, the building's visitor entry, and the driver's invoice, I said. Your signature is on 2 of them. The third is a security camera still with a timestamp. You're wearing the same watch you're wearing right now. My brother looked down at his wrist as if it had betrayed him. Then he looked up, and the mask finally slipped. Do you have any idea what you're doing? Do you know what this means for the business? 4 reputations. You'll ruin us. Truth ruins only what is false, I said. The rest survives. A silence fell that felt colder than the winter air seeping in from the terrace. The pianist, who had been frozen all this time with his hands hovering a chord, stood silently and closed the floorboard, muffling the keys. The chandelier hummed. Outside, somewhere beyond the frosted glass, a firework boomed and scattered red across the night. Mother's voice, when it came, was raw. Why, daughter? Why now? Why do this to your brother? He has carried so much. I turned to her. She rarely called me daughter. The word trembled through me. I'm not doing anything to him, I said. I'm stopping something being done to me. To me, mother. It's been done so quietly for so long you forgot it was violence. Her eyes glistened, and for a second I thought I glimpsed the woman she had been before all the performances, before the seating charts and the favor economies calcified into her bloodstream. She swallowed, composed herself, and said, we could have handled this within the family. Within the family has always meant against me, I said. My uncle banged a palm against the table, as if calling a meeting to order. Fine, he said. Let us talk about terms. If the will stands and we have not accepted that it does, surely there is a way to keep the property within the line of stewardship. A sale-leaseback. A family buyout. She can be made whole. Made whole. As if I'd been a ledger deficit to be plugged with a convenience check. I'm not a default entry, I said. I'm the named beneficiary. Father's voice slid back into that smooth register he used with inspectors and suppliers. No one denies the document, he said carefully, choosing each word as if stepping stones crossed a river. But there are encumbrances. The house has served as collateral in more ways than a paper would show. There are relationships. Understandings. If you were to insist on your claim without regard to those, you would be forcing us into a position none of us want. Min blurted, he means you'll blow up the capital stack. Min, father warned. I stared from one to the other. Are you telling me you used the property as de facto security without title? No one answered. The answer was in their silence. Something cold settled in my stomach. Not triumph, something older, sadder. I flipped to the back of the packet and slid out a smaller envelope, unassuming and cream. I had almost not brought it. Now I was glad I had. This, I said, is grandmother's second letter. It was in the same packet. It isn't notarized. She wrote it by hand the night after she updated the will. The attorney included it because he thought I should know, even if it had no legal effect. I unfolded the page, yellowed slightly at the edges from her desk lamp. The breath in the room drew in. She writes, if they tell you you're selfish, remember that a person asking for oxygen is not selfish in a burning room. She writes, I did not leave you the house to hurt them. I left it to you so your worth would not be measured only by what they remember to give. And then she writes, I am not asking you to endure anymore. The words hung, soft and devastating. I blinked away the blur. Across the table, Mother blinked too. Her mouth trembled. She looked down. Show me her handwriting, she whispered, as if the page might absolve her. I held it out. She took it like a relic. Her fingers traced the loops and hooks that had signed school permission slips and grocery lists, receipts and red envelope messages. Mother pressed the paper to her chest for a heartbeat, then handed it back, eyes glassy. It's hers. Min exhaled sharply, like a steam valve. So we are supposed to believe she simply changed everything. For you. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Please. This is about you nursing old grievances. It's also about this, I said quietly, and pulled out one last document, one I had nearly left in my bag, the one that had kept me awake for nights. The scholarship fund. A murmur rustled through the room. Min frowned. What? Grandmother's trust funded a scholarship, I said. It paid for my last 2 years of university, when my parents said the family budget was tight, and that if I really wanted to learn I could learn to be resourceful. The scholarship was anonymous by my grandmother's request. She asked her lawyer to keep it that way while she was alive, because she didn't want to embarrass anyone. After she passed, he was authorized to tell me if he believed it would restore what the family's neglect eroded. I met Father's eyes. The fund ledger is in here. Transfers. Dates. Amounts. Every time I thought I made it on my own, she was quietly making sure I wouldn't break. Mother flinched. Father's face turned to stone. Min looked as if for the first time confused. Why didn't she tell us? He asked, bewilderment cracking through his certainty. Because she knew you, I said softly. She knew the house would be justified as a business decision, but help given to me would be explained away as weakness. My aunt hissed, that is uncharitable. It's accurate, I replied. The room swayed on the edge of a cliff. On one side was the old choreographer. I'm apologizing, saying I hadn't meant to make a scene, tucking the papers away, promising to talk later. On the other side was a new ground where I was not begging to be let in. The drop between was all the years I had lost. I stepped into the new ground. Here is what will happen, I said. The certainty in my voice surprised even me. I will record my ownership of the Tran Hung Dao property first thing next week. The trust for its upkeep will be transferred into my administration, as specified. Anyone who has used the property informally as collateral must unwind those arrangements. I will not be responsible for private promises I never consented to. If the property has been named in documents without clear title, those documents will be corrected. If correction is impossible, alternative security will be found that does not include the house. Impossible, Father said flatly. Then you should not have built on sand, I said. You taught Min to believe that appearances can be leveraged like assets. They cannot. They are liabilities when the truth arrives. He opened his mouth to argue, to wheedle, to frighten me, I wasn't sure which. I raised a hand. I'm not finished. I will, however, allow access to the house for family gatherings twice a year, with written notice, because despite everything, I will not become what hurt me. But I will set the terms. Not to be cruel. To be clear. Min barked a laugh. How magnanimous. If you think I'm playing queen, I said, you haven't been listening. I'm setting boundaries. There's a difference. Something shifted in the cousins, those who had grown up absorbing the hierarchy like smoke. Lynn nodded, almost imperceptibly. Another cousin looked down at her lap, chin trembling, as if recognizing something that belonged to her, to a line she could draw in another room, another night. The old guard resisted. The uncles sputtered. An aunt whispered sharply about shame. The pianist, having retreated to the corner, took out his phone and stared at it as if hoping an app could dissolve tension. The staff hovered, unsure whether to clear plates or hide beneath the tablecloths. Father fell back on power. You will not dictate terms in my house, he said, voice low. Your house? I paused. Interesting slip. He blinked. Because this is grandmother's house, I said. We gather here because it holds her altar, her memory. But for years you treated it as yours when it suited you and as the family's when it was convenient. I am done rearranging myself to accommodate the shape of your convenience. Mother whispered my name. It was a plea and a prayer. I softened for a moment. This doesn't have to destroy us, I said quietly. It might save what's left if we let it. And if we don't? Min asked, the challenge automatic, reflexive. Then it destroys only what cannot survive the truth, I said. He stared at me for a long time. In his eyes I saw the child, who had been carried high and heavy with expectations. I saw the boy who had learned that love arrived with price tags and performance notes. I saw the man who had never once feared the word no, and therefore never learned how to live without yes. He looked away first. Father reached for the glass nearest him and found it empty. He looked around for another, then seemed to remember the staff and their eyes and the camera in the corner that recorded everything for posterity. He set the glass down without drinking. When he spoke again, his voice was the one he used when an inspector's pen hovered over a violation. You will not involve outsiders. You will not embarrass this family. The papers are filed with outsiders by design, I said. That's how laws work. And I am not embarrassed. Not anymore. For the first time in the entire evening, the chandelier flickered. Just a tremor. A voltage dip. But it felt like an omen, the old current stuttering, the wiring warming to a new load. My aunt cleared her throat, desperate to reassert decorum. Midnight wishes, she chirped, wild-eyed, gesturing to the Tower of Macaron pyramids and sugared oranges. We've missed the midnight wishes. Perhaps we could make one, I said. Make one that isn't a wish for someone to be smaller, so you can stay large. Her mouth closed. The sugared oranges glistened like polished suns no one wanted to touch. Mother, who had been still as porcelain, finally moved. She walked around the table slowly, her silk dress a whisper against the marble. When she reached me, she picked up the will with careful hands and read until the words steadied her. Then she looked at me fully, no choreography, no audience, just her eyes and mine. Your grandmother loved you, she said. Her voice cracked. I failed to see. I failed to protect. I failed to stop this. She gestured, not at the papers, but at everything that had led to the need for papers. I don't know how to fix it. But I will not stand in your way. A sound escaped my throat, half gasp, half sob. So small. So huge. Father bristled. We will discuss this privately. No, Mother said, and the single syllable startled us all. We will not hide the truth like dust beneath a runner. He stared at her as if a stranger had slipped into her skin. He opened his mouth, shut it, opened it again, then turned to the terrace doors with a sharp exhale, as if air itself had betrayed him and he needed the night. He shoved the doors open. Winter flooded in. The city's fireworks were a fever of color and smoke, the smell of gunpowder, and citrus rinds tangling in the wind. Min followed him, shoulders squared, the set of his back trying to keep the old script alive by sheer posture. The uncles drifted after, muttering, regrouping. The cousins lingered, unsure where to align. The chandelier steadied. I stood there, papers in hand, as the women in the roomy aunt, my brother's wife, my cousins looked at me with faces that were not uniform, not united, but human. Some angry. Some awed. Some relieved as if a breath held for years had finally been let out. My brother's wife approached first, her sequins gone dull in the new light of the room. He won't forgive this easily, she said darkly. Then, softer, he should have learned how to lose. So should I said. I lost for 30 years. That's how I learned. She pressed her lips together and nodded once. Lynn slipped closer, voice small. Can I see the letter? I handed it to her and watched as her eyes moved, how the words built something steady inside her. She looked up at me with a gratitude that made my chest ache. I knew then this night was not just about a house. It was about shifting a lineage by a degree. A small degree, perhaps. But trajectories change with small degrees. From the terrace, Father's voice rose, then fell, then rose again. Min's voice layered over it, raw and urgent. The words were muffled by glass and winter, but I could catch enough: liability, optics, contingency, shame. The vocabulary of men who confuse the stage for the home. I turned back to the altar at the end of the room. My grandmother's portrait watched us with that familiar sternness that had always, somehow, held warmth beneath. I stepped toward the incense bowl and lit a stick. The smoke curled upward, a ribbon unspooling. I pressed the stick into the sand and bowed my head. Thank you, I whispered. I heard you. A hand touched my arm. Mother. We stood together for a moment facing the altar, our reflections shivering in the glass of the family photos. She was strict, Mother murmured. With me too. But she saw what was happening long before I let myself see. I know, I said. We turned back as the terrace doors opened. Father and Min returned, faces scoured by cold and argument. Behind them, the sky was still wildly celebrating a new year that felt, for once, new. Father stopped a few paces away. He looked smaller to me than he had ever looked, less, because of the cold and more because of the way certainty had been chipped from his edges. "You will give us time," he said. Not a question. Not quite an order. An adjustment. "You have always taken it," I said. "Now you can have it with permission." Something like a smile, pained, unwilling, almost proud, flickered across his mouth and died there. "You have your grandmother's stubbornness," he said. "I have her clarity," I said. Min's eyes burned. "This isn't over." "It never is," I said. "That's why there are boundaries." The clock somewhere in the house chimed 1 o'clock, then 2, a golden tone rolling through the hallways like a benediction and a warning. The staff began to move again, rearranging plates, clearing glasses, grateful for motion. The guests, sensing the evening's choreography had been rewritten, and they would not be cast in the next scene, gathered their coats and whispered goodnights, their footsteps echoing toward the gate lit still in cold blue. In the vacated space, the air felt cleaner, though it carried powder and citrus and something metallic that would take time to dissipate. I gathered the papers, slid them back into the envelope without flinching. My hands were steady now. The weight of the envelope no longer felt like a weapon, it felt like a spine. Mother touched my cheek, a tentative graze like a bird alighting. "We will talk tomorrow," she said. "We will," I agreed. "Not to bury. To build." She nodded, then drifted away to oversee the shutting down of lights and the shooing of lingering uncles from the kitchen. Min lingered in the doorway a second, as if he wanted to hurl one last sentence like a glass across a room. He didn't. He left with a flick of his wrist, a gesture that had once dismissed me, now it dismissed only himself. I was left with the altar and the smoke and the piano asleep behind its wooden lid. I lifted the fallboard, ran a finger over the cool ivory. When I pressed a key, the note was a low, clean thing that hummed in my bones. I pressed another, and another, 3 notes that didn't resolve. I stopped. Some songs are not finished in one night. Some require new ears in the morning. I closed the piano softly and turned off the chandelier. The room sank from glitter to shadow. The terrace door had been shut, the fireworks now were only distant echoes. In the dim, the presence across the room looked like sleeping animals, harmless and unnecessary. I took my envelope and walked down the hallway where my steps had once echoed against oil portraits. They echoed again, but the sound didn't make me small. It drew a shape around me that felt finally like mine. Behind me, the altar's incense thinned, a silver ribbon dissolving into a house that would never again be the same. The morning after was colder than any winter dawn I remembered. The sky hung low and grey, pressing down on the tiled roofs of the old quarter like a lid. From my window, the garden looked frozen not in ice, but in silence. The lanterns from last night's celebration drooped, their colors dulled, their strings tangled by the wind. It was as though the house itself had aged overnight. Inside, the aftermath of the confrontation lingered in every corner. The champagne stains on the carpet. The half-eaten dessert sagging under plastic wrap. The smell of incense still clinging to the air, sharper now without the distraction of fireworks. I walked through the dining room, where the table stood stripped of silverware but not of memory. I could almost hear the echoes of raised voices circling the walls like restless ghosts. The divide. Father didn't speak to me that morning. He moved through the house like a shadow, issuing orders to the staff in clipped tones, avoiding my eyes. When our paths crossed in the hallway, he tightened his jaw and looked past me, as if I were furniture he could choose not to notice. It stung, but it wasn't new. What was new was the fear beneath his silence, fear that his control was no longer absolute. Min, on the other hand, sought me out. I was in the courtyard pouring tea when he appeared, his steps heavy, his tie askew. He looked less polished than usual, as though the night had stolen something from him. He stood over me, blocking the weak sunlight. You think you've won, he said flatly. I didn't come here to win, I replied, lifting my cup. I came here to be seen. His laugh was low, bitter. You don't understand how this works. Property, wills, none of it matters if the family decides otherwise. You'll find yourself isolated, cut off from everyone. And then what? You'll have a house but no home. The words landed like stones. But instead of crumbling, I felt something solidify inside me. I've lived without a home my whole life, I said quietly. This house was never mine to begin with. But she made it mine. And that matters more than your threats. For a moment, his bravado cracked. He looked at me as though seeing not his little sister, but someone he couldn't intimidate. Then he shook his head and walked away, muttering, "You'll regret this." The shattered facade. As the day stretched on, the phone began to ring. Aunts, uncles, cousins, each with their own version of damage control. Some pleaded for me to be reasonable, their voices dripping with false sweetness. Others demanded explanations, calling me ungrateful, selfish, a betrayer of tradition. My mother fielded most of the calls, her tone weary, her words carefully balanced between apology and deflection. I overheard one call she didn't know I caught. Her sister's voice crackled through the receiver, "If she insists on this, she'll tear us apart." Mother's reply was soft, but clear, "We were torn long before last night. She's only showing us the seams." Hearing that nearly broke me. For so long, I thought she hadn't noticed. That she had chosen blindness. To know she had seen the cracks all along, yet stayed silent, was both a wound and a strange kind of balm. Isolation. By evening, the house emptied of relatives, but not of tension. Father locked himself in his study. Min disappeared to the city, leaving behind only the echo of a slammed car door. Mother drifted through the rooms like a ghost, pausing at grandmother's altar more often than usual, her fingers lingering on the incense bowl. And me? I felt both triumphant and unbearably alone. The documents lay on my desk upstairs, neatly stacked, a fortress of ink and signatures. They proved my claim, yet they could not warm the hollow in my chest. I thought of grandmother, her stern gaze, her quiet strength, her unseen acts of protection. She had believed in me when no one else did. But she wasn't here to see this moment, to guide me through the fallout. My victory felt like ash in my mouth. The cracks deepened. The rupture spread beyond the walls. By the second day, rumors leaked. A cousin posted a vague status on social media about betrayal at New Year's. An uncle hinted to his business partners that there was unrest in the family. I began receiving messages from distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, some offering support, others thinly veiled condemnation. The family's carefully crafted facade was breaking, and I was the one holding the hammer, whether I liked it or not. I couldn't step outside without sensing the weight of eyes. Neighbors, friends of the family, even shopkeepers looked at me differently, some with curiosity, some with pity, some with admiration. I was no longer invisible, but visibility came at a cost. The lonely room. On the third night, I sat in my childhood bedroom, staring at the familiar cracks in the ceiling paint. The same cracks I used to trace with my eyes when I was a child, trying to escape into daydreams. The irony wasn't lost on me. After all these years, I had finally been acknowledged, but the recognition came wrapped in thorns. The voices of my family echoed in my head. Selfish. Embarrassing. Betrayer. But beneath them, another voice rose, soft but steady. Grandmother's letter. I am not asking you to endure anymore. For the first time in my life, I understood what she meant. Endurance had kept me alive, but it had also kept me small. Now, choosing myself meant rupture. It meant pain. But it also meant freedom. The fractured family. By the end of that week, the rupture was undeniable. The family had split into factions: those who supported me, those who supported Min, and those who wished only for silence to return. Gatherings were cancelled. Invitations were withdrawn. The once tightly woven fabric of obligation frayed at every edge. It hurt. God, it hurt. To see cousins who once played with me in the garden now turn their backs. To feel the cold shoulder of uncles who used to pat my head and call me clever. To watch the family name so polished, so untouchable begin to tarnish in the eyes of outsiders. But beneath the hurt, something else stirred. A strange lightness. As though, by losing them, I was losing only a cage disguised as belonging. Alone, but not broken. On the final night of my stay, I walked alone to the Tran Hung Dao property. The house stood silent, its wooden shutters weathered, its garden overgrown but alive. I unlocked the gate with the key grandmother's lawyer had sent. The metal clicked in my hand like destiny. Inside, the house smelled of dust and memory. The floors creaked under my steps, and the walls seemed to breathe with stories untold. I lit a single candle and placed it on the altar. The flame flickered, steadying against the draft. "I'm here," I whispered. I made it. Tears blurred my vision, but they were not only of grief. They were of release. Of possibility. For the first time, I felt the beginnings of peace, not the endurance grandmother once urged, but a peace born of claiming what was mine. The rupture had left me bruised, alone, uncertain of what would come next. But as the candlelight glowed against the old wooden beams, I knew one thing with absolute clarity: I was no longer invisible. And even if the family broke apart completely, even if I stood alone in the ruins, I would never again surrender my place in the story. The Tran Hung Dao house became my refuge. At first, it felt foreign, like stepping into a museum curated by someone else's choices. The wooden shutters stuck when I tried to open them, and dust clung to my fingertips whenever I touched the carved furniture. But slowly, as I swept the floors and aired out the rooms, I began to hear something beneath the silencier hum of belonging. This was not a space gifted to me out of pity. It was entrusted. Claimed. Mine. Redefining home. 4 weeks after New Year's, I stayed there. My phone buzzed constantly, relatives demanding, cajoling, threatening. I ignored most of them. Each call was a reminder that the old rules still lingered, clawing to pull me back. But every day I woke in the Tran Hung Dao house, I felt those claws dull just a little more. I started small. Repaired broken shutters. Cleared the garden of weeds, unearthing stone paths that hadn't seen daylight in years. Painted the walls with my own hands. It wasn't about making the house perfect, it was about leaving my fingerprints on it, proof that I existed here, not as a guest, but as the rightful steward. At night, I would light incense at the altar and read grandmother's letter again, the paper softening at the folds. "I am not asking you to endure anymore." The words became a mantra. Each time I repeated them, I felt my spine straighten a little more. Conversations with the past. Yet healing wasn't simple. Memories seeped into every corner. I'd sweep the floor and suddenly remember being scolded for spilling rice. I'd pass the old piano and hear the echo of my brother's triumphant notes while mine were dismissed as practice. The walls remembered everything. But instead of shrinking from those memories, I forced myself to sit with them. I would walk the halls at night and whisper aloud, "Yes, that hurt. Yes, they erased me. But I survived. And I'm still here." Naming the wounds took away some of their power. Some nights I cried until the candle burned low. Other nights I sat in silence, listening to the city's heartbeat outside the shuttered windows. For the first time, I allowed myself to grieve not just for the pain, but for the years I lost trying to earn love that should have been given freely. Setting boundaries. By the second month, the pressure intensified. Father called, demanding a meeting. Min sent messages dripping with condescension, urging me to hand back what isn't really yours. Uncles offered deals. Aunts whispered about family shame. But I didn't crumble. I hired my own lawyer. I filed every document. I secured the trust in my name. Each legal step felt like another brick in the boundary wall I was building, not to shut people out, but to protect myself from being swallowed again. When Father finally insisted on seeing me, I met him at the Tran Hung Dao house. He arrived in a crisp suit, his expression tight. I served him tea at the same table where grandmother once Saturday. "This is unnecessary," he said after a long silence. "You've made your point. But families survive because they compromise." I looked him in the eye. Compromise is when both sides give. All my life, I've given everything: my silence, my place at the table, my worth. What did you give? He flinched. Just slightly, but I saw it. For once, he had no quick retort, no lecture to flatten me with. He sipped his tea, bitter in his mouth. Finally, he said, "You sound like her." It wasn't a compliment. But it was the closest thing to acknowledgement he had ever given me. Rebuilding self. As spring arrived, I began opening the house to others, not the family, but friends. People who had known me outside the suffocating hierarchy. They came with laughter, with music, with simple warmth. For the first time, these walls heard joy that wasn't staged for appearances. One evening, my friend Mai stood in the garden under the blooming apricot tree and said, "This place feels alive again. Like it's breathing." I realized she was right. And maybe, so was I. Slowly, the hollow inside me began to fill, not with their approval, but with my own. I discovered that home was not about the walls, nor the bloodline that claimed them. Home was the place where I was allowed to exist without shrinking. A letter unsent. In late spring, I wrote a letter to Min. Not to reconcile, but to release. "Brother," I began, "I do not hate you. I hate the way the family taught us to believe love was scarce, that for you to shine I had to disappear. You played your role because it was handed to you. But I am done playing mine. I hope one day you'll understand. Until then, the door is open, but only if you enter with respect." I never sent it. Maybe one day I will. For now, it rests in a drawer, a reminder that forgiveness is possible, but not owed. The meaning of family. By summer, the rupture within the larger family was complete. Some relatives stopped speaking to me entirely. Others, quietly, began to reach out. Lynn visited one afternoon with trembling hands, saying she admired what I did. We sat on the veranda, drinking tea, and I told her, "Family is not who silences you. It's who sees you." Those words became the cornerstone of my healing. I no longer ached for approval from those who would never give it. Instead, I began building my own definition of familiar circle of friends, allies, cousins like Lynn, people who respected me not because of obligation, but because of choice. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. Healing the inner child. One evening, I found the box of old red envelopes grandmother had kept. Among them was the one she had given me when I was 7, the one with the proverb instead of money. I held it in my hands, the paper fragile, the ink faded. I lit incense and whispered to that little girl who once clutched it in shame. "You were never less. You were always enough. And now you are safe." Tears slid down my cheeks, but they weren't bitter. They were cleansing. Closing the circle. By the end of the year, the Tren Hung Dao house was transformed, not perfect, not polished, but alive. The garden bloomed. The windows opened easily. The rooms echoed with voices of people who chose to be there, not people bound by duty. When the next New Year came, I hosted a gathering of my own. Not lavish, not grand. Just a dinner with friends, laughter under lantern light, and envelopes exchanged not for obligation, but for joy. For the first time, the season did not sting. It glowed. And as the clock struck midnight, I whispered to myself, family is not blood. Family is love, freely given. I did not reconcile with everyone. Some wounds never fully heal. But I learned that healing does not mean erasing scars, it means wearing them without shame. And in the flicker of candlelight, I finally understood, my story was never about winning an inheritance. It was about inheriting myself. If you've stayed with me through this story, then you already know what happened on that New Year's night was never really about money, or property, or even the Tran Hung Dao house. It was about truth. About finally refusing to shrink in a room that had always asked me to be invisible. I won't lie to you, standing up to my family wasn't the victory I imagined. It didn't feel triumphant or glamorous. It felt raw, terrifying, lonely. Because when you draw boundaries for the first time, you don't just risk losing people, you risk losing the only version of belonging you've ever known. But here's the thing, sometimes what you're clinging to isn't belonging at all. Sometimes it's just a cage dressed up as tradition. When I stood there with those papers in my hand, my voice shaking but steady, I thought I was giving my family a revelation. I thought the documents were the gift. But the real gift was something else entirely. It was me finally seeing myself. Me choosing to stop enduring. Me deciding I was worth respect, even if no one else agreed. And I want to ask you, have you ever felt erased in your own family? Have you ever sat at a table where your presence felt optional, where your worth was measured in comparisons, where silence was safer than truth? If you have, then you know how heavy that silence can become. Here's what I learned, family is not just blood. Blood can betray. Blood can humiliate. Blood can laugh while your hands are empty. True family is built of something stronger: respect, love, choice. The people who see you, who honor your boundaries, who celebrate your existence even when there's nothing in it for them, those are the ones who deserve to sit at your table. So yes, my story is one of rupture. Of shouting and shame and secrets dragged into the light. But it is also a story of healing. Of walking through the wreckage and realizing I'm not broken, I am free. And if you've ever been where I've been, I want you to remember this: you are not invisible. You are not less. You don't have to endure forever just because you were told to. You are allowed to claim your place, even if your voice shakes, even if it costs you the approval of those who never gave it freely. Now, I'll turn the question to you: have you ever had to choose between peace and truth in your family? And if you did, what did you choose? If this story spoke to you, please like, subscribe, and share your own experience in the comments. Because maybe, just maybe, by telling our truths, we can remind each other that respect and love, not blood alone, are what make a real family.